There's a specific moment in every meeting, every group discussion, every family gathering, when you notice that everyone is agreeing a little too quickly. The consensus forms before the thinking finishes. The decision gets made before all the options get explored. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question forms. Am I the only one who sees this differently? But you don't say it, because the room has already decided. And challenging the group when everyone else is nodding feels less like contributing and more like causing problems. So you stay quiet. You let the consensus stand, even when something inside you knows it's incomplete. Maybe you've been in that moment. Maybe you're the person who speaks up anyway. Or maybe you're the person who stays silent and regrets it later. Either way, you've felt the pressure, the invisible force that pulls individual thought toward group agreement. Not because the group is right, but because disagreeing feels dangerous. And your brain, designed to keep you safe, will sacrifice accuracy for acceptance almost every time. Most people think that going along with the group is about weakness, about not having strong enough opinions, about lacking the courage to stand out. But psychology tells a different story. Conformity isn't a character flaw, it's a survival mechanism. For most of human history, being rejected by the group meant death. So your brain evolved to detect social threat with the same urgency it detects physical danger. When you disagree with the group, your nervous system activates, your heart rate increases, your stress hormones rise. Your brain processes social rejection using the same neural circuits it uses for physical pain. Research by neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA shows that social exclusion activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that responds to physical injury. Disagreeing with the group doesn't just feel uncomfortable. Your brain experiences it as actual threat. So when you suppress your divergent thought to maintain group harmony, you're not being weak. You're responding to a neurological alarm system that equates social rejection with danger. In 1951, psychologist Solomon Asch conducted an experiment that would reveal just how powerful this pressure really is. He gathered participants and showed them a simple task: 3 lines of different lengths, 1 reference line. The question: which of the 3 lines matches the reference line? The answer was obvious, unambiguous. But here's what participants didn't know. Everyone else in the room was an actor, and those actors had been instructed to choose the wrong answer. One by one, the actors confidently selected a line that clearly didn't match. Then it was the real participants' turn. And something remarkable happened. 75% of participants conformed to the group at least once, even when the group was obviously wrong, even when their own eyes told them otherwise. They looked at a short line, heard everyone call it long, and said it was long too. Not because they couldn't see, because the psychological cost of disagreeing felt higher than the cost of being wrong. Asch's experiments revealed something profound about human cognition. Your brain doesn't just process information and arrive at conclusions. It processes information through a social filter that asks, what will happen if I say what I actually think? And when the answer is isolation or conflict, the brain often chooses silence over truth. This doesn't make you dishonest. It makes you human. But it also explains why genuinely original thinking is so rare. Because original thought, by definition, means thinking something the group hasn't thought yet. And thinking something the group hasn't thought means risking the group's disapproval. Your brain has to override millions of years of evolution that say, stay with the group, even if the group is wrong. This is why committees rarely produce breakthrough ideas. Why focus groups tend toward mediocrity. Why the most revolutionary innovations usually come from individuals or small teams working outside established systems. Not because groups are stupid, but because groups create conformity pressure that suppresses the cognitive independence required for original thought. When you spend years in environments that reward agreement and punish deviation, something shifts in how your brain generates ideas. At first, you notice you're editing yourself. You have a thought that diverges from the consensus, and before you voice it, you run it through a filter. Will this make me look stupid? Will this create conflict? Will this make people think I'm difficult? And most of the time, the answer is not worth the risk, so you stay quiet. But over time, the filtering becomes automatic. Your brain stops generating divergent thoughts altogether. Not because you lost creativity, because your cognitive system learned that divergent thinking creates social danger. So it optimizes for safety instead of originality. Psychologists call this self-censorship or conformity bias. It's the unconscious process by which your brain suppresses ideas that don't align with group norms before you're even consciously aware you had them. You don't notice you're conforming because the conformity happens before the thought fully forms. This is why non-conformists aren't just people with different opinions. They're people whose brains have learned to tolerate the discomfort of social divergence long enough for original ideas to emerge. They feel the same neurological alarm when they disagree with the group, the same spike in cortisol, the same activation of threat detection systems, but they've developed the capacity to sit with that discomfort without immediately suppressing the divergent thought. Research on cognitive independence shows that people who consistently generate original ideas share a common trait: high tolerance for social discomfort. Not because they don't care what people think, but because they've learned that the cost of conformity, for them, is higher than the cost of standing alone. They'd rather be right and isolated than wrong and accepted. And that preference, that willingness to endure social friction in service of accuracy, is what creates the cognitive space where originality lives. Here's what most people don't understand about groupthink. It doesn't require bad people or malicious intent. It just requires normal human psychology operating in group settings. When you're in a group, your brain automatically tracks what others are thinking. It notices patterns. It detects consensus. And once consensus forms, your brain treats dissenting information differently than confirming information. This is called confirmation bias. Your brain gives more weight to information that supports the group's position and discounts information that challenges it. Not because you're intentionally ignoring evidence, because your neural architecture is designed to maintain social cohesion, and cohesion requires agreement. So your perception literally shifts to align with the group. You start seeing what the group sees. You stop noticing what contradicts the consensus. And the longer you stay in the group, the harder it becomes to see what the group has stopped seeing. This is why fresh perspectives are so valuable. Not because outsiders are smarter, but because they haven't yet been socialized into the group's blind spots. We live in a world that simultaneously celebrates innovation and punishes deviation. Every organization says it wants fresh ideas, but most organizations are structured to reward people who fit in, follow established processes, and don't make waves. Every school claims to value critical thinking, but most schools teach students to find the answer the teacher wants, not to question whether the question itself is worth asking. Every culture says it admires original thinkers, but most cultures treat people who think differently as problems to manage rather than resources to cultivate. So you learn early. Conformity gets rewarded, deviation gets punished, and your brain, trying to optimize for success in the environment it's in, learns to generate thoughts that fit rather than thoughts that challenge. The tragedy isn't that most people lack the capacity for original thought. It's that most environments systematically suppress that capacity before it can develop. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with seeing things others don't see. You notice a pattern everyone else missed. You question an assumption everyone else accepted. You propose an idea that doesn't fit the current framework. And instead of curiosity, you're met with resistance. Not because your idea is bad, but because it requires the group to reconsider something they've already decided. And groups, once they've reached consensus, defend that consensus with remarkable intensity. Challenging the group's conclusion feels, to the group, like challenging the group itself. So they don't engage with your idea. They dismiss it. They explain why it won't work. They imply you don't understand the context they understand. And you're left with a choice. Push harder and risk further alienation, or back down and watch an opportunity for better thinking disappear. Not stubbornness, pattern recognition, not arrogance, cognitive independence. Many people who develop nonconformist thinking styles aren't trying to be difficult. They're trying to be accurate. They genuinely don't understand why everyone else stopped asking questions. Why the group settled for the first workable answer instead of searching for the best answer. Why consensus matters more than correctness. And here's what's fascinating. Research on divergent thinking shows that nonconformists don't just generate more ideas. They generate qualitatively different ideas. While conformist thinkers tend to explore variations within existing frameworks, nonconformist thinkers are more likely to question the framework itself. They ask why we're solving this problem instead of that problem. Why we're using this approach instead of exploring alternatives. Why we're accepting this constraint instead of challenging whether it's necessary. This isn't contrarianism for its own sake. It's a fundamentally different relationship with uncertainty. Conformist thinking seeks to reduce uncertainty by aligning with established knowledge. Nonconformist thinking tolerates uncertainty long enough to discover what established knowledge might be missing. One optimizes for comfort, the other optimizes for truth. What's rarely acknowledged is how much courage this requires, not the dramatic courage of grand gestures. The quiet courage of maintaining your own perspective when everyone around you has agreed on a different one. Of saying I see it differently when consensus has already formed. Of staying curious when the group has moved to certainty. Of asking, but what if we're wrong, when everyone else wants to move forward? That kind of cognitive independence doesn't come from confidence alone. It comes from valuing accuracy more than approval. From believing that being useful matters more than being liked. From accepting that the cost of conformity for some problems is too high to pay. So if you're someone who questions consensus, who sees patterns others miss, who can't stop asking but why when everyone else has moved on, you're not being difficult, you're thinking independently, and independent thought is the only source of genuinely original ideas. Maybe the shift isn't learning to conform better. Maybe it's learning to trust that your divergent perspective has value even when the group doesn't immediately see it. Maybe it's recognizing that groupthink isn't a sign of collective wisdom. It's a sign that social pressure has replaced independent evaluation. Maybe it's understanding that the discomfort you feel when you disagree isn't evidence you're wrong. It's evidence your brain is doing exactly what original thinking requires, tolerating social friction in service of better answers. Because innovation doesn't come from consensus. It comes from the willingness to stand outside consensus long enough to see what consensus is missing. It comes from people who value truth more than harmony, who ask uncomfortable questions, who challenge assumptions everyone else has stopped noticing. Not because they enjoy conflict, because they understand that progress requires someone to think differently first. The people who change how we understand the world aren't the ones who fit in best. They're the ones who maintained independent thought when fitting in would have been easier. So when you notice everyone agreeing too quickly, when you see the consensus forming before the thinking finishes, when you feel that pull to go along even though something doesn't sit right, you have a choice. You can optimize for acceptance, or you can optimize for accuracy. There will still be moments when conforming makes sense, when the social cost is too high or the issue doesn't matter enough. That's okay. That's not failure. That's discernment. But there will also come a moment when staying silent means watching a preventable mistake happen. When going along means sacrificing something that matters. When conformity costs more than courage. And in that moment, you'll realise that non-conformist thinking wasn't about being contrary. It was about being awake when everyone else had stopped questioning. Maybe that's the deepest truth about original thought. It doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from the willingness to endure the discomfort of thinking differently. From maintaining your own perspective when consensus would be easier. From asking questions others have stopped asking. From seeing what's invisible to those who've learned to see only what the group sees. Not difficult, independent, not contrarian, awake, not rebellious, original. Until then, walk gently with yourself. Your divergent thinking isn't a problem. It's a prerequisite, and the world needs people who haven't learned to stop questioning yet.